Welcome, everyone. I'm Dick Deming. I'm Medical Director of MercyOne Cancer Center and the founder of Above and Beyond Cancer. Welcome to our weekly cancer education series. It's brought to you in part by a grant from the Iowa Oncology Society. And our guest this evening is Alex Sabbag. Alex, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Our topic tonight is going to be the role of the caregiver in the cancer journey. And we're going to get into that part of your story, Alex. But before we do that, let's just get to know you. So tell us a bit about yourself. Where are you from?
Sure. Well, all great books start within the beginning. So I was born in Des Moines, Iowa. I'm an Iowa native. I spent the first 18 years of my life, Des Moines, West Des Moines, went to high school at Deming, and then moved to Chicago for college and stayed for the next 18 years.
Okay.
Recently,
well, let's back up to Des Moines for a bit. So
Okay.
high school, I think high school is so formative in people's lives. At least it was in my life. So you went to Dowling High School. How many in your high school class?
300 maybe.
Okay. So big.
Yeah.
What was your claim to fame in high school? What would others say your claim to fame was in high school?
Oh man. I would say maybe my social skills. It's a bit of a social butterfly. Still am a good connector,
Mhm.
pairing people together and making people feel welcome, offering a little hospitality.
And did you have any awards, like the most likely to do this or that? Or how would people in your class describe you, your high school class?
Oh my goodness. I'd have to go dust off my yearbook and see the notes that everybody wrote. That's just felt like, it was a long time ago.
Okay.
I have no idea. I'd most likely, I don't know, most likely to get on stage, I guess,
Okay.
something like that. No academic awards. I'm going to out myself here. Like the school part was probably a little secondary than the life skills part for me. But
Theater, music,
when I
dance.
was younger, I grew up riding horses. So
Okay.
that was like, I would sort of like takes you out of the normal sports arena, that most kids go through. So I did play tennis because I loved the outfits. I still do. Yeah.
Good. And then how did you decide to go to Chicago after you graduate from high school?
I'm a city girl at heart, which is a little ironic since I live in a very quiet beach town currently. But Chicago just had the perfect blend of like, it's very urban, but Lincoln Park, which was the neighborhood I lived in, was super quaint and sweet and beautiful, and kind of felt like a small town within the big city. So state schools just weren't my jam, dorm rooms and big.
So what school did you go to in Chicago?
DePaul.
Okay. And when you started college, what was your first declared major?
I stuck with, it was a liberal arts degree, and communications, public relations was my focus from the beginning. The second I set foot in college, I was like, all right, I got to get out of here. I want to be a young professional and I want to go to happy hour. Like that's like how I viewed success in my young years, was like a power suit and a martini or something. And I will be honest that happy hour was never really a thing for me because I was always working.
So tell me one class, you can tell me more than one, but at least one class during your 4 years of college that has stuck with you or changed your life.
A class that changed my life. I did an internship in DC, and it was kind of alongside of a class. So to get credit for it, you write a series of essays or whatever to talk about your experience. So I think relocating to another city, I was working in politics, which was a really interesting experience, was a pivotal moment. Anytime I was able to write or speak, I excelled. So those were a lot of, PR classes and presentation type things.
And when you were in DC for that internship, were you with a elected official, or were you on Capitol Hill with a lawmaker?
I was working for Johnny Isaacson, who was the former senator of Georgia. So I got to know what life was like working in the Russell office building and living on Capitol Hill and going to hearings and doing the political thing.
Wow. So any experience from that time in DC, in terms of either preparing for a legislative hearing, a committee hearing, or attending a power happy hour?
Well, I wasn't 21 when I lived there, so I I played by the rules most of the time. I think for me, school was also kind of a process of elimination. So I would go in and I would learn about these certain sectors or topics and realize that was either for me or not for me. And the biggest thing about politics, I was like, okay, I don't want to do it, but our country is run by kids. So if I did want to do it, I'm the right age because everybody's very young that lives there and sort of grinds in that world. But that it informed a lot of the work I did once I moved on and started my PR company, which was, had a 12-year run in Chicago, just as far as like how certain healthcare legislation can come to fruition and what do you do to get it passed? What does it mean when there's a governor signature on it? And so there was like a little bit of that prior knowledge that helped, but most of my knowledge and expertise has come from life. So earlier today I was explaining, I was like, I have all the letters, the whole alphabet, if you were to say I got a degree in life. So
you started a PR firm fairly young, correct?
Yeah, I did. I was 25 when I.
Yeah. What gave you that confidence to start a PR firm at the age of 25?
I think when you're that young and we live more fearlessly because we know less. I mean, I think the less you know, the less you have to lose because you're really not sure. We don't know what we don't know. And I had the audacity to do it. And I remember Susan G. Komen, the breast cancer organization, was my founding client. So I had a little institutional knowledge from being in the business for 4 years. I had an anchor client that was notable and had a good reputation. And I had a leader within that client that had a marketing background. So I knew I was kind of in good hands for being, I knew I was young and I knew I was inexperienced, but I knew that the right person believed in me to do it. And I just was able to grow from there. I wasn't afraid of the grit and doubling down and putting in the hours and doing the work. And back then I would actually like lie about my age and just say that I was almost 30 for years. And I still want to lie about my age and say I'm almost 30.
Yeah. Wow. But how ironic as we shift gears that we're going to talk about a cancer journey and your first client was Komen.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
I was working at the PR agency and when online couponing client was my main account. And this was back in 2008 when the economy kind of took a dip. And I remember this client calling me and saying, Alex, can you just go find something good to sponsor? I was like, sure. Google good things to do in Chicago. Race for the Cure wasn't too far out. Picked up the phone, said, I want to give you $5,000. Tell me what I get. And I had the most amazing woman on the other end of the line connect with me and sort of execute that partnership. And it was really from there that I brought Komen on as a pro bono client to the agency and then was able to shift and leave with them being my founding client as I went off on my own.
Wow. Yeah. So let's shift a little bit to the relationship that's at the center of your book. So Alex has a new book out. It is called Soul Dive, and it is my journey into the deep. So tell us a little bit about the story that is center in this book, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. So life has a very interesting way of preparing us for what's next, whether we want to admit it, like it or not. But as I grew my PR business, a lot of the work I was doing, I think some of the most meaningful work I was doing was raising awareness and raising money for personalized cancer medicine. Now, you know what that is, and I'm sure a lot of people in your room do, but not everybody at that time, which is, 8 or so years ago, was aware that you get diagnosed, you take a sample of the tumor, and you understand the genetics behind it. How does it react to chemo? What's the roadmap? Are there, certain what's the protocol going to be? You're just kind of determining the path forward. And at the time, at least in Illinois, this wasn't covered by insurance. So hence like the private funding that came behind it. Well, fast forward, I was in a very serious relationship. And about 9 months in, my boyfriend was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer on my 33rd birthday. So the diagnosis came the day after I had returned from Spain. He had been in the hospital. The CT scan he received was misread. And so he was sent home. And so the next day we were having, you know, a little champagne, a little coffee, just kind of rolling into the birthday festivities. And he got a call from the Northwestern emergency room saying you have to come back for an emergency brain MRI, which is certainly not the phone call anybody wants to receive at any point in their life. So, you know, as you know, you go back in and you don't leave until they know, you know, what's up. And so it was, you know, getting him admitted and waiting a couple of days for them to be able to do the biopsy, which is, you know, ultimately brain surgery in a way, and understanding what the actual diagnosis for him was. And it was the day after he was diagnosed that he proposed. So in about a 24-hour period, I went from his girlfriend to his caregiver to his fiance. And that's, you know, kind of the beginning of the book. So the book does open with that story. The book is not entirely about, you know, him and our relationship necessarily. It's more so whether you're the patient or the caregiver and you're in the room when it happens, you know, there's a massive shift. You're the way you were when you woke up, and you're the way you're going to be when you go to bed. And the rest of your life is about to change, you know, whether you want to admit it or not. And so just sort of how I chose to move through that experience and come out, you know, on the other side is a lot of what the book is.
And Alex, his first name?
His first name is Matt.
Matt. And how old was Matt? You were 33 that day. How old was Matt when he got the news?
He was 41.
Okay. And so
42, 41, 42.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit, maybe both your impression of how Matt reacted to that phone call in that first week of, you know, once the biopsy was done and the diagnosis, and how you reacted, and maybe compare and contrast those reactions.
I will say I mean, he was a beautiful human, and one of the best things he brought into my life was meditation. And so when we started dating, he was sharing about his meditation practice, how he would go on these 10-day silent retreats, and he would meditate daily, and he had a cushion, and he had this whole process, and was not only informed, but walked the talk, like had a very, very beautiful practice. And I didn't, you know, I mean, I love yoga. I now own a yoga studio. And so at the time, like it was just something new and foreign to me. So he handled the news really gracefully. I mean, there was a lot of acceptance, and there was a lot of, you know, he was very able to be honest in those moments of not only learning that he did have a brain tumor, but learning about the brain tumor. Cause you know, you don't know everything day one. You really don't know much until like 2 to 3, 4 weeks down the road. And at every turn, we got pretty much the worst possible news you could get. I mean, there was like, you know, terrible genetics, resistant to chemo, really aggressive, inoperable. I mean, all the words, you're like, just give me a good word, like anywhere here. And we couldn't get it. Now me, on the other hand, if I had any tools at the moment, they were like up on a shelf collecting dust. So, you know, my response was very much fight or flight, and, you know, just getting into this, like, okay, if you have a 0.01% chance of survival, like I'm the woman for the job, I'm going to fix it, you know, and just not taking a breath or a beat to really hear what was happening. You like hear that a lot when people are sitting in the room with their diagnosis, to always have another person in the room so that what's being communicated can land. And I honestly think he heard it better than I did. I mean, I heard it and I understood it. I was just unwilling to accept it.
Right. So here's Yoda. Just the universe will unfold exactly as it should. Just life will be what it will be. And you're like freaking out.
Yeah. I mean, gracefully freaking out, you know, not, didn't want to ring any fire alarms, but I think there's just this, like, this pause that we can
Uh-huh.
take in any moment, whether it's an impending diagnosis or news of any kind, where we can just like be in that quiet, that liminal space between and just sit. And it's super uncomfortable and we don't like it. But the more we can practice that, I think the better we can, sort of be a little bit, we can practice a little more equanimity as we, kind of ride the waves of those, of whatever that news may bring. And in this,
Were you annoyed by his calm acceptance?
No. I mean, I don't think either one of us wanted to unnecessarily ring fire alarms, because I think that, the things we did share, just like, from a belief system, like you have to believe in miracles. You have to believe that, like, when somebody puts out that book, the 11 ways that you can be saved, and it's like forest bathing and this and that, and it's just these things, you're like, really, sitting in the woods is going to work? Like, there's a part of you that just wants to believe that that's true. If it worked for somebody else, and if it lands and resonates with you, then like maybe it truly can work. So I wasn't annoyed at all. I think we were just like, okay, obviously there's a path forward with Western and traditional medicine, and we will do some form of standard of care, but what else? And I think the fact that we both shared that curiosity and tenacity just to go digging and not stop. And especially for me, right? I mean, there's a certain level of like, he's the one that's sick and will start feeling the effects of being sick, and I won't. So, of course you get exhausted and depleted, but, I was like the machine of, okay, well, we're going to go here, and clinicaltrials.org becomes your best friend. So it's like, all right, well, there's something in New York, we're getting on an airplane, and there's something over here, we're going to go over there. And, we're faxing in papers and discs with scans, and like navigating that system is not for the faint of heart, but we had a lot going in our favor. I mean, if we could have thrown connections or cash at the problem, we would have. And, for whatever it was worth, I had a little bit of institutional knowledge of how this stuff works on the back end. So it wasn't about having the right or wrong team. It just happened to be something that couldn't be beat in the end.
This clearly became, I mean, it sounds like it would have become both of your full-time job at that point, was to pursue every possible remedy that might improve the situation.
I mean, no stone was left unturned. Ironically enough, so I owned this PR company. My number 2 was about my age, and she checked into the same hospital to have her second baby the day before we checked in with brain cancer. And so my leadership team for my company was literally out. And so I called my 20-year-old intern and I said, you're in charge. Good luck. I don't care if all of our clients fire us, but like, I can't help you, do what you can. And so I put my role in my own business on ice and did make him my full-time job.
And maybe talk a little bit about the relationship, your relationship with Mark, and how difficult times can bring people together. Difficult times can pull people apart. And sometimes it's a little of both.
It's a little of both. I think there's, when you talk about fairness, which is sort of like not a fair topic to talk about when you talk about cancer, because none of it's fair. Our relationship did not have the gift of time to argue about how to empty the dishwasher, least of all navigate a terminal illness at, a time when we, we're probably going to get engaged and like start a family. So for us, it was, our relationship was as solid as you could have a relationship be for being together for 8 or 9 months. I mean, that's pretty thin-ish ice already. Not to mention this particular cancer, all cancers take a physical toll on the body. There's no doubt about that. But when you look at like radiation and use of steroids and like the therapies that are coming in to try to mitigate growth and, all the things you don't want to happen, I mean, you're literally altering the brain of the patient. And so it became, sooner than later, I was like living with somebody I barely knew, whether it was, and who cares what's to blame? I think at the end of the day, when you make peace with all of it, you just realize it wasn't him. And so there's no like, anger or resentment that I would have and say, oh, but you were mean. It's like, well, of course you were, like that is what it is. And that's completely fair, for that to be our reality, and unfair all at the same time. So it got to a point where it wasn't the right decision for us to continue living together. I mean, he needed 24/7 care, because of where the tumor was situated on his brain. It was debilitating the left side of his body. And it was a 24/7 responsibility. And when I looked at, kind of the landscape of my life and his, it's like, well, I couldn't show up for him in the way that he needed it, even though like my ego was really telling me that I could fix it all. And I definitely lost myself. So there's no question about that. It was this whole experience of kind of going through this with him was a very big mirror moment, where I kind of woke up and was like, okay, who am I and what am I doing in this life? Because staying in the relationship would have been devastating, to my future and to taking care of myself and living, into my purpose, which, if you've read the book or scanned it, I chose to leave, which was a really difficult choice. But there does come this time when you've got to put your own oxygen mask on first and still realize that it's not the diagnosis is not yours. This wasn't something that I had to live with or was obligated to stay all the way through.
Yeah. My number one is how brave of you to write in this way. I totally admire where you're coming from and agree with it, but to put it down in writing that I left my fiance as he was dying of cancer, isn't kind of like the lead story of a feel-good movie.
No, but it's a great plot for a Lifetime movie. If you really need a tearjerker out there.
Yeah.
It's
Tell me again, how far along in his diagnosis did you realize he's now not the same person? I mean, his consciousness, his personality, and I totally understand radiation, steroids, the other medications. And then throw on top of that neurologic deficits and requiring 24 care. How quickly did those changes happen that you realized this is not the Matt that I fell in love with 8 months ago?
Yeah, pretty quick. I think once he started standard of care, there was a shift. But even before that, I mean, they put you on steroids to make sure this thing doesn't grow. It's like, and to give you the energy to like boost up your system so that you can withstand the chemo and radiation you're about to endure. So it was pretty soon, like just the dynamic of our relationship started to shift, not to mention, you're putting all of these, outside emotional taxers on a new relationship, like the fear and the anxiety and the uncertainty and losing hope and lack of faith. I mean, that's some big life stuff right there. And, to neither one of our faults, like we didn't know what to do with that. I think is the easiest way to say it now, like looking back. But, it was when you do start any type of aggressive treatment like that, we couldn't naturally have children. It was, I mean, there's other big factors that would play into us together. But mostly it was never going to be remotely normal. Like, we would have never been alone in our life or relationship. So I think it was kind of one of those relationships that came in as a really significant teacher. And I think we've all had them. I mean, relationships end for a number of reasons. They don't, it could be nothing. It could be divorce, it could be whatever. But when we look back, if we're really, really honest with ourselves, it's like, well, that really had to happen because I had to go through that to get to where I am now.
Right. And at what point, and maybe if this doesn't sound right, but at what point did you maybe start to feel like you were the mother and not the fiance, and
I
that
mean,
you were.
right away, not the mother, the warden. I mean, with fight or flight, you like jump into control. Control is like the thing we grasp, because when so much is out of our control, we're like, what can I grab onto? And I mean, I remember looking at his doctor and I was like, okay, great. So let's get really honest. What do we eat? What do we this? What do we that? And the doctor was like, just keep doing what you're doing. And I was like, that's your advice? Like, you keep doing what we're doing? I mean, look at the room we're sitting in. That's a terrible answer. So, we just went through, the food and these like holistic approaches and alternative practices. And I completely left the role of his partner and went into his like warden. I mean, I was managing the time clock. I was, organizing who was going to sit with him if I went to yoga or with a friend or whatever. It was like, there was absolutely no, the whatever, like, intimacy or romance in our relationship was non-existent, because I couldn't, for me, and this is 1,000% to my fault and something I'm very much not proud of, but I couldn't get in the ring with him and be honest. I couldn't let him like have a moment to say like, hey, this isn't okay, but we have to be okay with it being not okay. I couldn't go there. To me, I was like, it's going to be fine. We're going to keep going and we're going to find this and we're going to call this and we're going to explore over here. And, look at this new thing that just popped up. I mean, I was just unwilling to quit.
So when you decided that you needed to leave the relationship, have your own space, put your own oxygen mask on first, was he able to have a serious conversation, or by that point it was that the opportunity to really talk about separating? Were you able to have a real conversation?
We didn't at that point. I'm very close with my family and, became closer with his as well. And it was, during one of the visits with his mom, I asked for help. I was like, I really can't shoulder all of this. I need a little break. I need that's all I asked for at the moment. And then she brought him back to live with, her and his dad in Southern California. So it was sort of, the decision was kind of made for me, but I was already there.
Mm-hmm.
I'd already accepted that was probably the right. I just didn't kind of know how it was all going to unfold. And he needed that because he needed the care. He needed that attention, and it wasn't, just wasn't something I could give. But he did live another 4 years.
Oh,
after
wow.
that moment. I know, which is an insane amount of time. That's why, I understand prognosis, but it's like you can hear it and then ignore it all at the same time, because he wasn't supposed to live 6 months.
And then what was your relationship like over those 4 years? Did you see him once a year, once a month? Never?
We stayed in close touch. Yeah. I mean, it was tough, as you do kind of shake off the effects of the standard of care eventually, right? So after a little bit of time had passed, we were able to connect and start to rebuild, because it's traumatic. I mean, the whole experience is traumatic. I mean, not only the diagnosis and the like knocking on death's door and the uncertainty and the steroid rage and all of that. I mean, it's a lot to kind of unpack, but we were able to mend the relationship over time and keep in touch, see each other frequently. So I do have, I saw him, a couple months before he passed. So we definitely, as much as you can, repair and like get to a really loving place where there's understanding and, kind of all of it. We did as much as we could this side of glory.
And did he stay with his mom and dad through the end of his life? Yeah.
He did.
Yeah. When did you decide that your story needed to be told and that you felt the strength to be able to tell your story?
So a couple answers to this one. I think one of the biggest lessons I learned when I went through my yoga training certification was don't share unprocessed life experience. For example, you break up with your boyfriend last night, no need to talk about it in class tomorrow. Just avoid it. And I didn't really think about it too hard at the time, but as you fast forward and you go through something as big as this, like most of the time, like in the thick of this experience, I was like, I can't talk about it because I don't have the words yet. I actually don't know how I feel and like what's happening. So a lot of it was just, I just had to live through it was the biggest and hardest part of, going through the phases and experiencing, the like hitting the bottom, and how do you put one foot in front of the other to try to like see yourself out? How do you start over? What does it look like to not be defined, as a caregiver by this experience? Because as big of a city as Chicago is, it becomes a very small town very quickly when you go through something like this. So there was that as one answer. And then the second answer is I have had a book in me since my early 20s. And, this book is not just about cancer or caregiving or any of that. There is a lot of life anecdotes. We go back to the beginning. You're introduced to my family. There's a lot of lessons, a lot of learnings, and plenty of dating exposés that, could fill an entire like Sex in the City round 15 or whatever. And when I was younger and like going through all these experiences, being single and living in a big city, my mom was like, you got to write this stuff down. And I just was never energetically pulled to do it. And I think the reason why is, number one, if I did do it, I probably could have retired by now because I hate to say it, but it was really great content and somebody had to follow on the words. But number two, I think in order to come out and be able to truly connect with people and make a difference and be of service, I really truly believe in servant leadership and think that's what I'm called into doing. There has to be relatability and there needs to be the depth so that you can meet people in the moment. And I hadn't lived that yet in my 20s or early 30s. I didn't live that until I sat in the room and heard the person I loved the most was going to die. And that truly was the experience that brought me so far into the deep. And it was messy and was ugly. And being in my orbit over the 5 years that transpired after that was probably really hard to watch, especially for my parents. But as time goes on and as the weight starts to lift, first of all, he had to die, like it was like there's no, you can be at peace with something, but not be like truly, peaceful with it, if that makes sense, until it's over. Like you can't really, that the beginning can't come until the end happens, that the ending is required. And it was, all of these things had to happen first before it was the right time to hop into the space and write it. And it was just shortly a year after my yoga studio was open in Southern California, where I just felt like it's time. And I just I could feel it. And the reason why I knew is interesting enough is the couple months before I was like clued into it being time, I was cranky. Nothing made me happy. I was agitated. I was irritable. I was just downright impatient and nasty. And I just remember my business coach looking at me and she's like, this is not a good look and you need to figure it out. She's like, what is it going to take? And I was like, I have to write my book. And she's like, then that's your job. Then stop everything and write the damn book. And I did. I wrote most of it in about 2 weeks, and soup to nuts, the process was about 4 months, and I published in May.
So Alex, one thing you said that stuck with me is, this cancer caregiver doesn't define me. And I talk about that a lot with my patients. Like, for example, Matt, at what point does having cancer define you as, well, I'm this person with cancer? And it would seem to me, and this is just, somebody who lives 4 years and dies, that did define him. His brain tumor ended up defining his last 4 years. At what point during the relationship or after his death do you feel like you can go out into the world and that his story doesn't have to necessarily be part of your story with someone you meet? Or is it still such a important part of who you became that it is part of your, either your origin story, if you will?
That's such a great question. I think I have a couple answers for it. Number one, there is there's a beautiful practice you can take with yourself, no matter who you are and where you are in life. If you sit in front of the mirror and you allow every single title, wife, mother, sister, brother, job titles, qualifications, you just let all those titles come up, and then you one at a time invite them away. And as you meet your gaze in the mirror, you're left with you. And whatever is there is like truly who you are. That's like deep, deep soul work. It's not easy. And I think the thing about being a caregiver, I mean, number one, Friday is National Caregivers Day. And so that's a day that I will always, kind of give a little bit of extra love to. But I think when we go back to this like relatability, like how can you, if you're me and you want to make a difference and empower people and inspire them and help them get off the bench of their life and back into the ring, how do you do that? And I think sharing a story that people can look at and be like, oh yeah, that's me too. I see myself in that. And look, she's okay. She's dusted herself off. She rose from the ashes. She's living her life. She's happy. She's successful. Like if people can see themselves in you at your darkest moment, and also on the other side, that gives them hope that they don't have to be defined by the thing that has knocked them down, which is what I dubbed the 2x4 moment in the book. The 2x4 moments don't define us. It's a phase, and it's a space we occupy for an unbeknownst amount of time. But the quicker we can get really honest with ourselves about what's happening, what's the reality of it, I think the sooner we can start to surrender into it, begin to let go, and just keep waking up and living, right, as we make our way to the other side. And I don't know what it looks like. I can't give anybody the roadmap, not just because I wasn't given a roadmap, but because there isn't a roadmap, because there's really no apples to apples experience. But when we stop, the comparison is the thief of joy. So when we stop the comparing and we just look at the emotions that are underneath, the fear, the anxiety, the uncertainty, all these things, we can relate to that as humans. That's what brings us together underneath the experience.
Yeah. And you described this 2x4 moment, which is a phrase I use, like getting hit upside the head by a 2x4. I mean, when that happens to you, it does tell you there's something really profound taking place here. I mean, pay attention, number one.
Yeah.
And learn as much as you can, because this is something real.
Yeah.
Let's shift gears a little bit, but this program is part of our cancer education series. Most of the people that are watching are cancer survivors, family members, and caregivers. With the hindsight of what you have been through, you probably didn't do everything perfectly, and you probably learned from some of your mistakes. With hindsight, what would be some words of wisdom that you might give to someone in the midst of a journey with a partner who has incurable cancer?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, I always lead with this: you have to keep fighting and don't fight fair. And that's just, advocate really hard, be a bull in a china shop, turn over every stone. I think the industry and the landscape of cancer in general changes so fast that it could, I don't want to say the word should, but it could be reassuring to know that every single day new stuff comes on the market. There's new opportunities both in this country and abroad. So don't stop and don't give up, because you just never know what's going to drop in your lap that's going to be able to help. Number two, as it relates to the relationship, this is really hard and something that I just straight up couldn't do, but don't forget to be the girlfriend or the wife first, taking care, you're both caregivers I believe that marriage is a mutual acceptance of being a caregiver. I'm not married yet, but I hope to be someday. And it's like, well, I'm going to take care of you and you're going to take care of me. And whether that means somebody takes the trash out and somebody washes the dishpan or the laundry and the this or whatever, like it is a mutual agreement that you're entering in. And so if this is your season and need the care by the partner, don't forget about, the spousal agreement too. I don't know if that's date night or if it's, whatever, like at set time where you just don't talk about the disease. Like maybe there's a room in the house that the disease isn't welcome in. I don't know what it is.
Right. And obviously that's a lot easier if, both both people still have all their cognitive abilities and there's not a lot of
Yeah.
physical disabilities.
Yep.
The situation you described, which I have seen, is much more difficult when the illness not only, is not curable, but takes away part of the essence of what your normal personality is and your normal functional abilities. So
Yep.
it's hard to just say, yeah, continue to be the lover, the spouse, and
Yeah.
when the situation is so different. Um, other
The two other
other
things I'll add
Go
though
ahead.
on that, it doesn't necessarily have to be the lover and the spouse for the other person. You can be the lover and the spouse for yourself too. There's, a bubble bath goes a really long way. Taking a yoga class, doing one of those crazy collagen masks that makes you look 22 when you wake up the next day. Just really little things to breathe a little life back into yourself. Because the other thing I'll say is there is a philosophy and a concept of impermanence, of which is incredible news when things are really tough and kind of bad news when things are great. And it just is saying that nothing is ever going to stay the same. You will never be in this place forever. You won't. I mean, there will be something that shifts and lifts where you are no longer in this role. And time is an interesting construct when you talk about this, but you have to know that like you are going to ebb and flow. And if you have your own practices and your own routines, your own foundation, something that you can fall back on, it does breathe a lot more equanimity into your whole process of moving through.
What would you say is the importance of having outside advice, counsel, friends, whether it is a therapist or a sister or a best friend, and for you, the caregiver, to be able to take time off?
So I'm going to back up that question just a little bit further. There are people around you who want to help, and they will offer support, and they will give their love and time and treasure and attention to ease your situation. None of that matters if you're not in a place to receive it. And this is something that I struggled with in the months that I was going through it. I couldn't receive. I pushed everything away because I said, you don't know. You're not 33 taking care of your fiance. You don't understand what brain cancer is. You don't have this, you don't have that. And I compared and I pushed away, which resulted in me becoming very isolated, really bitter and very angry, because I couldn't let that stuff in. And it wasn't until, even after the book was done that I was like, okay, I am ready to receive. And I know all these people who were trying to help me then, and I couldn't allow it in, and I'm ready to accept it now. So I think I would start there, like getting really clear on not only what you need, but what walls and what needs to come down. What do you need to let go of in order to really let that in? And then what does that look like for you? Do you want the advice, or do you just want the meal dropped off at your house? And then be very clear. If you're very clear about how you want to be served, people are at the ready to do it. And I don't want to say they don't care, but if you want them to come in and stay for a coffee, tell them. And if you don't, be like, just leave it at the door. Like, we want to please. Like, I think people pleasing is somewhat in all of us to certain degrees, right? I mean, we don't have to be people pleasers to like want to make somebody happy. And if we know exactly what's going to make you happy, chicken pot pie, boom. And you don't want to talk about it, I'm leaving it and I'm off to soccer practice or whatever it is, just be really direct if you can, so that people know how to live up on you, so that you feel supported and you don't feel energetically drained because they're standing on your doorstep trying to talk to you,
Yeah. Yep. So I want to leave room for questions because I know there's going to be a lot of questions, and so this seems kind of abrupt to shift, but so this is my last question. Then we're going to open up. So I know you're a yoga instructor and you have a yoga studio. What has yoga taught you about being a caregiver, and what advice would you give people in the room that are caregivers to loved ones going through the cancer journey that has been informed by your yoga practice?
So my history with yoga has been very fickle, and I know I'm not there in person, but just stick with me. I'm 5'10". I have incredibly long limbs. They don't even fit in the camera frame. And think of myself as incredibly athletic or nimble. So getting on a yoga mat was insanely frustrating. I felt like everybody was a 5'1" gymnast telling me to put my foot in a place where like the foot doesn't go. Okay. So that's probably some of your experience with yoga too. Over time, after I, ran the marathon and my body started to hurt, I rediscovered the yoga mat, and I was very, very in the physical with it. Hot power yoga, addicted, 5 to 6 days a week. Absolutely loved it. After my fiance was diagnosed, yoga was like the safe haven respite. My house was like Grand Central Station for cancer. The yoga studio was a place I could go and show up in any way, shape, or form to simply be. And I was given permission to do that by a teacher, the first teacher that received me after we got out of the hospital, went crazy over my engagement ring. And as I burst into tears telling her he was dying, she goes, I don't care what you do. I just care that you keep coming. And she didn't hug me. She didn't pity me. She didn't, there little girl with me. There was no sympathy. It was all empowerment. And with that permission slip, I knew that that was a place where I could go in any way, shape, or form. I could do the move. I could lay there and cry. It was whatever I needed it to be in the moment. So I had at least an hour of my day that was free. And so yoga really gave me the space. It gave me a practice that was out of my mind and in my body. It gave me a space to get quiet. It just gave me a little time to take a breath, and like have that pause. And I think that's really important. And I will say that I define Soul Dive, which is the name of my studio in Palm Desert, as that moment of time when you drop out of your mind and get into your body. It's the reprieve, it's the respite. And whether it's 10 breaths or a good night's sleep or an afternoon nap, full disclosure, I took a 15-minute nap before I got on this call. I did. I really was tired. A long podcast interview before. And it was like, oh man, I'm drained. The sun went away. It's coming back out now, but we have to take a pause. There is only we're not a machine, I thought I was Superwoman for the better part of my younger adult life. But I'll tell you this, force and devotion and determination, that is not enough. We have to rest and we have to pull out a little bit to be able to refuel and show back up for the call of duty.
Okay. Great words of advice. We're going to open up to questions. So we'll start with our live studio audience first. Poon, you're up first.
Yes. As I listen to your story and your yoga practice, I just think, did you use some of the meditation also to get to the let go?
Yes. Meditation is such a powerful tool. And I will say, some people are very scared of meditation because it's very scary to be, oh no, it's just me and my thoughts. What could possibly come up, but there's many, many forms of meditation. There's walking, there's moving, there's gardening, there's cooking, there's journaling. For me, journaling was a huge outlet. I mean, no surprise, I'm a writer. And so putting words down on paper was incredibly therapeutic. But when I was able to do it, just writing, stream of consciousness, whatever comes up, fears, anxieties, whatever is on my heart, the second I was able to articulate it down on the pages, it held a lot less power over my life. So if writing is something that calls to you, a journaling practice in the morning is really beautiful, just to start the day really fresh, or before you go to bed at night, so you go to bed with a clear mind. As far as guided meditations, there's a ton of free content on YouTube, so much free content on YouTube. There's also a practice called Yoga Nidra. It's Nidra, which is it's a guided meditation. And it's a body scan. So it actually takes you through every single body part and invites it to relax. And I'm not doing it justice because I'm not a Yoga Nidra guide, but it is so lovely. They're about 20 minutes in length. They take you into the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the nervous system that's designed for our rest and recovery. And it's sometimes more rejuvenating than 2 hours of sleep, 6 hours of sleep. It's a beautiful practice.
Great. Next question. George.
How would you describe your feelings today about traditional medicine as opposed to some non-traditional approaches?
No pressure. I'm always promising to be honest. So, and it's in the book. So I hope you pick up a copy and get the full unscripted version. But I believe that traditional medicine is very powerful. Trauma and triage. I mean, look no further. Like, get in there, get with an oncologist, get a plan together. However, I think that if we stop there, we're missing the rest of the body. And what I mean by that, and this is my opinion, and I am not a doctor, there are a lot of underlying conditions, and I don't mean like, diabetes or heart disease. I mean like, anxiety or grief or sadness that have nothing to do with maybe this cancer that you just were diagnosed with or that your spouse was diagnosed with, but like just life stuff that we may be aware and cognitively hanging on to or unaware that our subconscious hasn't let go of. And we don't necessarily, we can't really know when that stuff is present, but sometimes we just know we're off. And I think it's important to look into that stuff all the time, especially when we're healthy, just to make sure we keep clearing out the things that are no longer needed. It's like a full body emotional detox as much as a physical. But especially when something else comes on board, because for these, in my belief system, is for these traditional therapies to work, the body really needs to be ready to receive it. And if the body's over here fighting the loss of a parent or a pet or a major life transition, we're not in peak condition to fight this other thing that's now come up that we're being tasked with addressing. And so I think that they go together. And my hope is that the oncology practitioners and, the doctors that are leading these amazing institutions are open, and are just look at the entire human. And I know that time is always of the essence. We don't have 3 hours. You don't have 3 hours to spend with every patient that comes through the door, but just looking at the entire human and what else might be happening in their world that could slightly tweak the overall prescription, right? Of here's your standard of care. And then you really like the woods. Great. You're going to go in the woods every day for 15 minutes. And that's going to be part of your care package. So I do believe that there's necessary for both.
So let's go more into that, because I totally believe what you're saying. I would say there's lots of different theories and also practices that are proposed to do that, to free up mind, body, spirit over everything that has been locked up inside. I mean, it could be talk therapy with a psychotherapist or with a mental health counselor. It could be yoga or a physical motion. It could be, as you said, a practice such as forest bathing. Of those, and again, it doesn't have to be either or, it can be both and, but to what extent do you think touch therapies where a practitioner is working on you versus talk therapy, what works best for you to free you up? Is it talk or touch or both? And do you think different people, how do I, as a cancer doctor, help connect a person with the right other things? And in my practice of integrative oncology, I've got 7 different touch therapies. I've got 20 different talk therapies. How do Western medicine help patients find the path that you're describing?
I think it's twofold. My personal opinion, touch over talk. I'm not the biggest fan of talk therapy. I think it gets us in a trauma loop. I'm like, okay, at some point you got to be done talking about it and you got to just move on to something else. I'm a huge fan of touch therapy in many different modalities. Whether it's lymphatic drainage, whether it's acupuncture, massage therapy, you name it. I think there is a really profound healing that happens through the practitioner and the patient when you get aligned with the right person. Now, I think there's a big responsibility on the patient to have the wherewithal to know what they are going to receive. if they are more drawn to the talk, that could be a good place to start. Maybe there's something to unpack there that gets a few things out of the way in order for this over here to start working. So I don't know that it's I don't know that it's your full responsibility to say, okay, now you're going to go to this side of the practice and get linked up with the massage therapist. I think, using the intuition that we all have intuition. It can be blocked because we're real noisy upstairs, right? But we have this intuitive knowing of what our bodies crave. I mean, truly, there's a reason why sometimes you sit down and you order a hamburger. Well, because your body wanted a hamburger. I mean, it's not, this shouldn't be earth-shattering news, but there are ways to look at all of the options available and just see what you gravitate to. Write them all down, look at them all on a piece of paper and be like, okay, that word really speaks to me. Try it. See how you feel on the table. If you feel rejuvenated, if you feel your mind at ease, if you feel your shoulders drop a little bit, go back. If you don't, move on. I think there's a little bit of trial and error, but you will with the diligence and the dedication, you'll find this blend, right? And the way that you refer people to the integrative side of the practice is beautiful, but they got to meet you there.
Mm-hmm. Well, our time is up, and I will definitely have you back and continue to explore these topics. So our guest has been Alex Sabbag, and her book is Soul Dive. And do you have a website, Alex?
I do. So you can find more about me and my journey on soulfulalchemist.com and on Instagram at Alex Sabbag. And I will let you know, I put out a weekly email. It's called Into the Deep with Alex. So please go get on that list. It's my poetic wisdom drops, and I promise it won't waste your time. And the final note, if you are remotely inspired or intrigued by what you heard and you want to go a little deeper with me, you can always visit me in the desert at Soul Dive Yoga. That's Palm Desert. Or you can come with me to Sicily on a 7-day retreat the first week in September.
Awesome. Well, Alex Sabbag, thank you so much for being our guest. And if anyone watching this knows someone that would benefit by watching it, this conversation will be available on demand beginning tomorrow at the Above and Beyond Cancer YouTube channel and also the MercyOne Cancer Center website. I hope you'll join us again next week for our cancer education series. Thanks, everyone.